Hello from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Welcome to the Mint Special. Now today we ask, what is Sadek's role in coordinating COVID-19's economic and social response in the region? This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network ZTN. Now, the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, was established as a development coordinating conference in 1980 and transformed into a development community in 1992. It is an intergovernmental organization whose goal is to promote sustainable and equitable economic growth and socio-economic development through efficient, productive systems, deeper cooperation and integration, good governance and durable peace and security among 15 Southern African member states. SADC members are Angola, Botswana, Democratic Republic of Congo, Lesotho, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, Swaziland, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Now, SADC was formed to advance the cause of national political liberation in Southern Africa through effective coordination and utilization of the specific characteristics and strengths of each country and its resources. SADC objectives went beyond just dependence reduction to embrace basic development and regional integration. Hence, SADC was formed with 4 principal objectives, namely reduction of member state dependence, forging of linkages to create genuine and equitable regional integration, mobilization of member states' resources to promote the implementation of national, interstate and regional policies, and concerted action to secure international cooperation within the framework of the Strategy for Economic Liberation. We are joined on the Mint Special today by Barbara Lopi, the Head of Communications and Public Relations at the SADC Secretariat based in Gaborone, Botswana. Barbara, welcome to the Mint Special. Now, Barbara, how is SADC working with member states to come up with a common position to curtail COVID-19, bearing in mind the different approaches being implemented by each country?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having the Southern African Development Community on your program. SADC, like any other regional and continental organizations, is collaborating with the WHO to adapt strategic measures and advise member states in addressing the challenges that they face during this COVID. Let me begin by highlighting that the SADC member states have been working harmoniously in achieving effective results to common problems and issues even before COVID-19. To date, since 1992, SADC member states have adopted close to 33 protocols and a number of declarations, agreements, charters, and memoranda of understanding on several issues. And during COVID-19 pandemic, SADC protocols such as the Protocol on Health, Protocol on Trade and Services, Protocol on Transport, Communications and Meteorology, and Protocol on Health, Protocol on Labor and Employment, among others, have been useful in facilitating coordinated regional approaches in responding to the pandemic. So since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, SADC has been in the forefront in coordinating the regional response to the pandemic by putting in place measures to contain the spread of the pandemic and to mitigate its socio-economic impact in the SADC region. From the onset of the pandemic, the SADC Secretariat has been engaging with member states on common approach to the epidemic. Since the 6th of March 2020, SADC has facilitated regular consultations with member states to address, among others, issues related to overall country preparedness and readiness, implementation of COVID-specific screening strategy at all points of entry, improving testing capacities, coordination at regional levels, case management, and this is just to mention a few. For instance, on the 9th of March 2020, SADC Ministers of Health and ministers responsible for HIV and AIDS held an extraordinary meeting on regional response to COVID-19. Then there was also the SADC Council of Ministers virtual meeting on the 18th of March. There was a multi-sectoral technical committee virtual meeting on the 31st of March 2020, and then an extraordinary Council of Ministers virtual meeting on the 6th of April. So the SADC Council of Ministers endorsed decisions of the health ministers And the following measures are now in place and are facilitating regional response to COVID pandemic. These include, at the regional level, these include the suspension of regional face-to-face meetings and instead utilizing virtual conferences and other ICT technologies, re-establishment and expanding of the technical committee for coordinating and monitoring the implementation of the protocol on health, which continuously continue to monitor and advise member states, adoption of regional guidelines on the facilitation of cross-border transport operations across the region during COVID-19. And these guidelines are to facilitate and ease the movement and transporting of goods across the borders, but these are goods specifically related to providing support in relation to the COVID-19, things like medical related stuff and also pharmaceutical related stuff and also essential goods like food.
Now, do you think there is a need for Sadek to propose to its member states the establishment of a Sadek National Disaster Center? This is not the first or last pandemic that we will see in the region.
Well, I didn't mention that in the measures that are being in place. Actually, just towards the end of February, there was a Sadek meeting for ministers' response for disaster reduction. And among the things that was also adopted is for the formation of a SADC Disaster Regional Preparedness Committee. So this is something that is already in place.
The issue of debt relief and monetary support for COVID-19 is obviously critical right now. Is SADC assisting member states to lobby multinational institutions for such debt relief and monetary support?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, SADC has since the end of March been providing weekly situational reports on the status of the pandemic and advisories with policy recommendations to member states aimed at saving lives, protecting the financial and risk, and also protecting regional integration and preparing recovery, among others. So in support, member states are also motivating for debt relief and monetary support from the multinationals.
Now, COVID-19 is creating huge unemployment in the SADC region. I mean, there may be huge labor migration between countries. In Zimbabwe's case, labor migration from South Africa may occur if migrants lose their jobs in that country. Is SADC asking member states to come up with a common position on these critical labor issues? And does SADC have any mitigatory measures to propose?
Thank you for that question. Again, like I mentioned earlier, SADC has several protocol and policy guidelines already in place to address some of the common issues affecting the region, the COVID-19 pandemic among them. So in this regard, the SADC employment and labor sector has already in place key frameworks for the protection of migrant workers. For instance, just recently in March 2020, the Ministers of Labor and Employment, together with the employers and trade unions, made and adopted new SADC labor migration action plan that facilitates cooperation between member states to ensure that the rights of labor migrants and their welfare are protected. The plan also is to be implemented in the next 5 years, but the Ministers of Labor and Employment also adopted guidelines on the portability of social security benefits earned by migrants during their course of employment, such as pensions and also injury or sickness benefits and compensation. I'm giving this as a background to just say that we have already been collaborating on some of these things. So in terms of the migration during the COVID pandemic, the response measures taken by the majority of member states have disrupted operations and business, with the general exception of essential services. So while there is no complete information on the scale of the problem related to the situation. We are confident that the SADC labor and employment action plans will be able to address those kind of migration challenges.
Now, Barbara, with borders closed and trade flows pretty much ground to a halt, is there a proposed plan that SADC is presenting to its members from the regional bloc to restart trade linkages and get their economies back on track?
Thank you. Like I mentioned earlier, under the COVID-19, there's a guideline which has been put in place to facilitate just the movement of essential goods, drugs, and other pharmaceutical equipment and food items. But indeed, the blockage of the free movement of goods and services across the borders has affected traded products within the region. So what SADC is doing, like I mentioned, we are currently preparing a comprehensive socio-economic impact of COVID-19 and its implication on the region, with proposed short to medium and long-term measures to be considered by the regional bloc post-COVID-19, just to ensure that the regional economies get back on track. The closure of borders, yes, has led to few commodities being traded among member states. The trade restrictions have also affected economic viability of enterprises, and the regional supply chains are also directly affected due to the lockdown.
Now, what support has SADC received from such agencies as the WHO, World Food Programme, WFP, the CDC, and the United Nations?
Yes, thank you. With regard to the World Health Organization, SADC has been working with them in terms of support to procurement of personal protective equipment to member states, to strengthen the member states' capacity to respond to COVID-19. And also there's been capacity building that has been facilitated in the cases of management of infection, prevention, control, and surveillance. Also, other partners like the African CDC, the Center for Disease Control, has also been working closely with the SADC Secretariat and also with the member states to provide support on the distribution of medical equipment, especially testing kits, and also the PPE and ventilators and other capacity strengthening. Other support also, we have gotten into partnership with UNESCO on an initiative known as Learning Never Stops. This is to ensure that we work with other organizations to support the continuity of education using different ICT technology. We also have other support from partners like UNICEF, where SADC Secretariat is working with the UNICEF Eastern and Southern Africa Regional Office to come up with joint regional action plan that will highlight short-term and long-term action towards responding to COVID-19. It should also be noted that at member states level, UNICEF has also supported member states in the procurement of essential health supplies, such as the procurement of medical equipment and other protective supplies. And this has been done in governments like Zimbabwe is one of them, Botswana, Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, just to mention a few. Then we have also, through the information that we are collecting from member states, compiled a list of the critical gaps that member states are facing in terms of their response to COVID. And SADC has engaged the African Development Bank to where we've presented a proposal to support those kind of needs that the gaps have been identified from. So this is just to mention a few of the partners that we are working with.
So Barbara, do you think SADC members are investing enough money on their health budgets? And what would SADC propose to member states post-COVID-19 with regards to reprioritizing their budget expenditure?
Thank you. Let me start by answering that question by stating that in 2001, through the Abuja Declaration, all African countries, including SADC member states, committed to allocate 15% of their national budget to health. Last year in 2019, the African Leadership Meeting, which was held in the sidelines of the African Union Heads of State, brought together governments, the private sector, and the global development community to coordinate accelerated progress towards achieving that universal health coverage and also the 15% towards the national budget. A lot of measures are being put in place, among them where African leaders have emphasized the need to invest in health to drive human capital development. And also there's been emphasis on the need for greater commitment among development partners and governments to work towards achieving that 15% goal towards national budgets. In terms of where we are, the progress has been progressing well, but we still have a majority of member states who are yet to meet the 15% allocation of their national health budget. So there are measures that are being put in place to also lobby private sector contribution to the health sectors.
Now, finally, Barbara, do you have any final words to say, particularly in terms of what SADC is doing in supporting member states to get over this pandemic?
I think what I would say is that there's value in regional coordination, and we need to continue working together as a region. There's value in information sharing and sharing best practices, but also we need to just put in place all the guidelines provided by the WHO, but also the recommendations that the SADC is providing. Like I did mention, Secretariat has been compiling on a weekly basis reports on the status and also providing policy recommendations to the member states on some of the emerging issues that need to be put in place as we are working towards response.
Great. That was Barbara Lopi, the Head of Communications and Public Relations at the SADC Secretariat. Thank you very much for appearing on this Mint Special. Now, the purpose of creating regional trading blocks or communities is to reduce or eliminate unnecessary trade barriers between member states and to allow the free movement of goods, services, labor and capital. The advantages include less chance of conflict and war, larger markets and customer base, allows businesses within member countries to exploit economies of scale, freedom of movement of goods and peoples, increased global significance, improving environmental and social conditions, the promotion of democracy and liberalization, trade creation, the elimination of protectionism, increases trade, leading to a more efficient allocation of member state resources. SADC is and should play a crucial role in ensuring effective coordination between member states, as well as to lobby as one voice on behalf of the bloc with multinational and developmental donors to complement states' efforts. I'm Andy Hodges, and you've been watching the Mint Special. Goodbye, and you all be safe.